Further afield, Turkiye has agreed to support Sweden in its attempts to obtain NATO membership. President Tayyip Erdogan will forward the application to Ankara Parliament for ratification. Erdogan had spent months blocking the move due to concerns about Swedish relations with Turkish militias. Sweden and Finland requested to form part of the military alliance shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine last year. However, Stockholm experienced issues after Turkey and Hungary refused to ratify its application. Okay, let's speak to Brooks Spector, an international relations expert. Brooks, you see this all and you think what?
Good morning. Well, good afternoon by now, I guess. What I think is that the Turkish government spent a lot of time trying to extract some fairly minor concessions from the Swedes in the nature of closer monitoring of groups like the PKK and some other organizations in Sweden, and also managing to raise up the visibility of its long-standing interest, sometimes, of joining the European Union. In exchange, it got out of the way of blocking Swedish accession into NATO. You have to see this as a win for NATO as a whole. You have to see it as a win for Ukraine by one remove, and you have to see it as a serious win for Joe Biden as well, who has spent a lot of his time trying to keep the NATO alliance on track, pointing in one direction as it deals with the after effects and the implications and obviously the actual circumstances of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What has not happened so far, at least, is the door has not been opened, at least in the immediate term, for Ukraine to make its pitch to join NATO. And that's a topic, obviously, we can explore.
Sure. You speak of the long-standing interest sometimes. What does that mean?
Well, every once in a while, the Turkish president said, well, we're not really interested in joining the EU anyway. And then a couple of weeks or a month or so later, he would reiterate their interest. And this goes back a decade or so. So I guess they have read the tea leaves as well, that the train was already leaving, not to mix our metaphors, and they should get on before it leaves the station entirely. Otherwise, they would just be out there complaining, but not being party to any of the decisions and discussions.
What is the attraction? Is NATO almost a year later a united force?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things going on. One is the more unified NATO is in terms of dealing with the Ukrainian crisis, the easier it is to begin to set a system in place of the kinds of weapons and munitions and support that go to Ukraine, rather than lots of individual decisions being made piecemeal by 31 different nations. The extent to which the entire alliance is in the same mindset is the extent to which things get made in a more coherent and comprehensive way. Now, the Turks also appear to have gained some leverage over their desire to upgrade their F-16, that's a military aircraft made in the United States, to upgrade their F-16 fleet, which is F-16 is one of the premier fighter planes, and so the Turks very clearly want to have access to more of and parts for and upgrades of that particular line of equipment. The challenge for Ukrainian membership in NATO is that the way the alliance is structured, it's structured as a defensive alliance, and Article 5 of its charter, which goes back to 1949, says an attack on one member will be considered to be an attack on all. Now, since Ukraine is in the middle of fighting an invasion, that would almost by necessity drag the other allies in the alliance into an increasingly confrontational, in a direct kind of way, with Russia. And that's something that Joe Biden and others have been saying for months and months now, that that's something they don't wish to enter into. To get the Ukrainians to join NATO means that they have to no longer be fighting, presumably, and that there are certain reforms and adjustments and changes in the way, especially, that they manage their military, as well as all the other things about ongoing corruption and transparency in government more generally. So it's complicated still.
Yeah, it's quite complicated, because you speak of a train that's left or is about to leave. Ukraine will be taking a look at this and thinking, well, we also want a seat on that train before it gets full. And so at the end of it all is about them joining, for the world also to assess whether, I guess partially, whether this was all worth it.
Well, tell me more about what you mean by it all being worth it. Which part of it are we discussing?
Well, the war, right? And so there's been different sectors of society that are taking a look at why on earth this is all happening. And now you have Ukraine wanting to join. Well, not now you have Ukraine wanting to join. They've been wanting to join NATO. Instead, NATO is providing ammunitions and other kinds of support. But at the end of it all, whether you are part of this group or not, will it then have been worth it?
Well, I mean, the first part of the answer to your question, of course, is that Ukraine didn't start the war. Ukraine was invaded February last year. And since it is and remains a sovereign and independent nation, and since the Russians had signed off on a guarantee of its territorial integrity way back in the early 1990s in the Budapest Accord, quite clearly the Ukrainians feel that they need to prevail in this, lest they become a dismembered satellite state of Russia. And to the extent to which the nation has suffered grievously in terms of the destruction and the death, well, that's a decision that they seem to have made so far, which is that their struggle and their independence and their defense, so far at least, has been worth it. The cost on the allies, the cost on NATO allies, has been one in material terms rather than in invasions of territory or death and destruction.
Brooks, thank you so much for your time. That's all the time we can afford this afternoon, because we have to make way for Stephen Grootes. Hello, Stephen.